In the previous part, we have studied about enter the British and also how they've converted from a trading company to a empire which has ruled over a nation. So in this part, we'll be starting with from paradise to hell. So how India, being one of the richest country, to how it has become one of the poorest in the period of colonization. So after the years of the Battle of Plassey, we've already studied about the Battle of Plassey, where it happened in between Siraj ud Dawla and the East India Company, and where Mir Jafar has been the traitor and they were able to take over the Bengal. So, after the years of Battle of Plassey, the East India Company has started to collect the revenue. They started to collect the taxes in the areas of Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. These were one of the richest during those periods, and the British, after the Battle of Plassey, after some years, has started to collect the taxes in these areas. They were so rich that Robert Clive has said that it is the paradise of the earth. So he has told these places to be the paradise of earth. It is important to remember this, that Robert Clive has said that it is the paradise of earth. So even though they used to collect such high taxes, such high money from the people, but the governance was not equal to the revenue which they are collecting. So for suppose, why are the taxes collected? So taxes are collected for the development of the people and for the improvement of facilities and all these things. But here the British used to collect very high taxes, but the governance and the development was not at the same rate. So they used to collect more but spend less on the country, and they used to plunder more, take to their own place. So next, this is what they used to do. So in 1770 to 1772, there was a famine, and it has caused crop failure. So when there is famine, in the sense there is no proper rainfall or anything like that, there are many factors for the crop failure, and due to this famine, many of them, which killed nearly 1/3 of the population of Bengal, which is about 10 million. So due to the famine, this was the thing which has happened. And there was also a great famine, that is of 1876 to 1878, which was of 2 years, but it has almost affected 8 million people, and it primarily hit the Deccan Plateau. So under the British rule, there were many famines which were faced by India. But what are the factors for those famines? So the first factor is that the Indian traders could hold. So when there is a famine, in the sense there is a crop failure. So in the sense the crop produce is less. So when there is less produce, the Indian traders itself used to keep their stock. They used to hold their stocks. So why will they hold their stocks? So if in a particular area there is less food available, so if you store your stock after some time, maybe those stocks will get still higher price, is what was the attitude of the Indian traders during that period. So when they used to hold the stocks for the future, the present price could increase a lot. This thing has caused the scarcity of food during the famine, and so the prices have also increased and people started to starve. And the next point was that the Britain used to export the grains to their country, which is almost 1 million tons per year. So it is such huge number they used to export to Britain from India. So when export is more, what will the people in this place eat? So there has to be a proper ratio in between what is left behind in the country and what is being exported. But they used to export such huge quantities that these people have started to starve. And along with these two factors, there was another thing, that is the British economic policy. So, in this, what used to happen is the British has introduced a policy which is the free market, where there is a fluctuation of prices. So, in British has introduced the free markets, where suppose in this previously there used to be a check that how much price a particular item can increase. But now, after this British economic policy, it has become a free market where there is a fluctuation of prices and there is no bar for it. Like, if for suppose onions per kg should not increase from 50 rupees as a bar, but if there is no bar, then it can range from and go until 100 rupees or more per kg itself. So, in this way, you can understand the policy of free market where there is fluctuation of prices with no bar. So, with all these factors, there was a scarcity of food and it has taken the lives of many people. So, even though all this was happening, Lord Lytton, who was the Viceroy of India, has said an order that there is to be no interference of any kind on the part of the government with the object of reducing the price of food. So he has told that the government will not interfere in this matter of reducing the price of the food. It will be happening as usual. After saying this statement as well, he has also kept a week long feast. He has given a week long feast to about 68,000 officials, Maharajas, and many more people. See, he has said the statement the government will not interfere with the price of the food, and also he himself has given a week long feast to the officials and the Maharajas. So, see, that nation is facing food scarcity. How can the Viceroy of India give such a long feast? Because already people are suffering, and if you are doing all these feasts and everything, the scarcity will increase even more. And especially the rural India has sank into poverty due to this scarcity of food. See, anything happens about food scarcity, money, or the economic breakdown will start from rural places. So here also the same thing happened, that the rural India has faced an economic breakdown and also they had to face deep poverty. So with this we have completed about the famine part, and India has to face about 20 famines during the British Empire. So next part we are going to study is the drain of India's wealth. So how did India's wealth started to reduce? So once we used to be that 1/4 of the world GDP was contributed by India, but what have we become at the end of the colonization era. So now, on this matter, many great personalities have spoke, and they have almost concluded that 45 trillion US dollars were expected to be looted from India in a period of 1765 to 1938. So the next part is the changing landscapes. So how did the lives of the people changed? So there was a decline in the India's indigenous, that is the native industries. So the industrial revolution in Britain has started in the year 1760, the Industrial Revolution in Britain, and along with that, the India's indigenous industries have reduced. See, the India's manufacturing capabilities are so high. We've already seen about it in the first part itself, and they used to manufacture the textiles, that is cotton, silk, wool, jute, hemp, and coir. So all these were manufactured in India. But what did the British do? Basically, our Indian cotton is one of the best quality cotton. But what did the Britain do after the Industrial Revolution, which has started in the Britain? So basically, if an item is going out of a country, it is called export. And if an item is coming into the country, it is called import. So, India and Britain. So, the Britain used to import the Indian goods with heavy duties. So, when heavy duties are imposed, the cost of a particular item will also increase. So, previously, that particular item might have been costing some 200 rupees, but due to the heavy duties, the import duties which were introduced by Britain, that particular item will start to become some 1000 rupees. So when there is a drastic shift of price of an item, then obviously people will start finding alternatives. So in the same way, the Indian goods were taken into Britain with heavy duties, and on top of that, the Britain goods were imported into India with minimum tariffs. So, for suppose if our Indian goods are costing some 100 rupees, but with minimum tariffs, this machine made goods which is imported from Britain will be costing 20 rupees itself. So, what will people prefer? What is cheap will be preferred by people, and so the demand for the native Indian textiles has also reduced. So, what had happened? The weavers, due to the reduced use of the Indian goods, indigenous textiles, and the reduced export of these due to its increased cost, they have converted themselves into agricultural laborers. So, they used to be weavers, but due to the less work or less pay they are getting, they are not able to fulfill their needs, and so they have converted themselves into agricultural laborers. So once India used to contribute one fourth of world GDP, but at the time of independence, it has significantly reduced to up to 5% of India's share of the world GDP. So we used to contribute to up to 25%, but it has reduced to 5% at the time of independence. So with this, we have completed until how the indigenous textiles of India were damaged by the British. So the next part will be starting with how they have come into the governance of India. So now we'll give a quick NCERT reading. So we've started with the part from paradise to hell. A few years after its victory at the Battle of Plassey, the East India Company has secured the right to collect the revenue in Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha, which are some of India's richest regions during that period. And Clive has said that particularly as the paradise of the earth. So, in religious context, it is heaven. Here, an ideal, wealthy, and perfectly happy place. So, the company's agents extracted maximum revenue while investing minimally in the government's development, while they were the devastating consequences for the population. In 1770 to 1772, which are coming on top of the 2 years of the crop failure, the harsh revenue collection targets imposed by the East India Company in Bengal, requiring farmers to pay a high rate of cash taxes on the produce of their lands regardless of the harvest conditions. So, whatever the harvest, whatever the result might be, it might be more or it might be less. But the tax which they have to pay used to remain the same. Regardless of the harvest conditions, caused a catastrophic famine which killed nearly one third of its population, which is estimated to be 10 million people. In fact, the company maintained harsh revenue collection targets and ever increasing the land tax during the famine. So, such cruelty was denounced later not only by Indian personalities but by some British officials as well. So, here, for instance, a century later, Hunter, an official, has wrote that while the country every year became a total waste, the English government has constantly demanded an increased land tax. Altogether, the stifling summer of 1770, the people went on dying. The husbandmen, the farmers, sold their cattle, they sold their implements of agriculture, and they devoured their seed grain, and they sold their sons and daughters till a length no buyer of children could be found. And they ate the leaves of trees and grasses of the field, and day and night a torrent of famished, and which was poured into a great cities. So they used to struggle a lot. The people used to struggle a lot, but still they used to increase the land tax. And there was a point when they started to sell their agricultural implements, and also there was an extent where they had to sold their children as well. So such tragic famines were going to record throughout the British rule and during the Great Famine of 1876 to 1878, for instance, which has damaged or perished 8 million Indians, which was mostly in the Deccan Plateau. So, the severity of the crisis, some Indian traders could hold on their stocks in the hope of high price and causing an artificial scarcity. And the British administration continued to export grain to Britain, which is about 1 million tons of rice alone per year during the 3 years of the famine. Apart from these factors mentioned above, the British economic policy we already studied about it, about the free market and the fluctuation of the prices. And Lord Lytton, who was the Viceroy of India during this period, even though there was a famine, he told that there will be no interference of government. At the same time, he has held a week-long feast to the Maharajas, satraps, and Maharajas and officials. And the precise numbers of the famines during this very rule is from over 12 to 20. And according to the several famine commissions and other reports, it has been estimated that the total number of human victims could be anywhere from around 50 to 100 million. So when there is famine or something like that, they have to conduct some relief camps. But British has also done that very minimally. Even though they're collecting the taxes, it is their responsibility to conduct the famine relief camps. But that was not done. And they were also saying that the doctrine that in the time of the famine was entitled to demand relief could probably lead to doctrine that was entitled to such reliefs at all the times. So if told that if they are providing relief to them during the famines, it will turn out to be providing the reliefs every time. And we could note the famines in India have occurred throughout the history, caused by droughts, floods, military campaigns, and other factors, but never on such a scale. So, famines are not something which are unusually happening to the country. They used to happen from time to time. But whatever has happened during the British time was never on such a scale. And during the colonial era, especially the rural India sank into deep poverty and never recovered. The drain of India's wealth. As we saw earlier, economic exploitation of India has formed the foundation of the British colonial policies. In the year 1895, the US historian and the political scientist Brooks Adams has noted that very soon after the Battle of Plassey, the Bengal plunder began to arrive in India, and the effect appears to have been instantaneous, for all the authorities agree that the Industrial Revolution began in the year 1760, and possibly since the world began, no investment has ever yielded the profit reaped from India's plunder. So the Industrial Revolution in British has begun due to the profit they have reaped from India's plunder. So whatever they have took or plundered from India was their investment in the Industrial Revolution, is what it was said by US historian Brooke Adams. In other words, according to Adams, the Industrial Revolution in Britain, which required much investment, was possibly at least or either partly was by the stolen wealth from India. And taking his cue from the scholars such as Adams and Digby, Dadabhai Naoroji, who was a respected political figure, authored in 1901 The Poverty and the Un-British Rule in India, and in which he compiled from the British reports the wealth estimated to have been drained out of India, and at the same time, Ramesh Chandra Dutt, who was an historian, has done a similar exercise in his economic history of India, and all these studies have shown that there were many billions of pounds which they've extracted from India. And a more recent estimate by Utsa Patnaik was from the period of 1765 to 1938, which comes to be some 45 trillion US dollars, which is about 13 times the British GDP in 2023. And they are extracted not just through taxes but by charging Indians for the colonial power expenditures on building the railways, the telegraph network, and even on wars. So, had this wealth remained invested in India, it could have been a very different country. So, whatever the taxes which are imposed in India, if they were invested in India itself, then it would have been not the same like how we are at the present. Changing landscape. So, the expanding colonial rule impacted nearly every aspect of Indian life, as rulers were convinced that India could be reshaped according to their superior conceptions. So, first we'll be studying about the decline of India's indigenous industries. Indigenous in the sense the native. So, previous to the 18th century, India was renowned for its manufacturing capabilities, especially in the clothing industries. Cotton, silk, wool, jute, hemp, and coir were being the chief ones. And India's cotton textiles, in particular, with rich and intricate varieties and bright colors, and textiles ranging from ultra thin muslins to richly embossed fabrics, were in high demand in many parts of the world. And the British policy imposed heavy duties on Indian textiles imported into Britain, while forcing the India to accept the British manufactured goods with minimum tariffs. So we can see that in the short notes as well, which is clearly written. And moreover, the Britain now controlled the sea trade as well as the exchange rates, and so the Indian traders found it difficult to export as earlier. So the result was the ruin of India's textile industries, and in 19th century the Indian textile exports have fell sharply. So while the Britain's imports into India grew even more sharply, the communities of skilled artisans who had practiced their craft for generations were reduced to poverty and were forced to return into agriculture and increasing the overtaxed lands. And as William Bentinck, who was the Governor General of India, has observed that the bones of the cotton weavers are bleaching the plains of India. So they have started to work in agriculture as agricultural laborers. And similar scenarios have unfolded for the India's manufacturing of iron, steel, paper, and other goods. And India's share of the world GDP kept declining throughout the colonial rule, and especially it has fell to hardly 5% at the time of independence. So, in less than 2 centuries, one of the richest lands of the world has become one of the poorest. So, in the next part, we'll be starting with the dismantling the traditional governance structures.